will just introduce the moderator of the session, which is Luisa Bravo. So Luisa holds a 5-year degree in architecture engineer from University of Bologna, when she also got a PhD in building and territorial engineering, of course, in the same university. Since 2002, Luisa registered architect, engineer in Italy, and after 4 years of professional practice, Studio and Arco, she found his own firm, Bravo Design, in Bologna, where she currently works. So after completing, after finishing the PhD, Luisa was appointed as a research fellow for a national research program founded by Italian Minister of University, Research and Education at University of Bologna, where she then served as a postdoctoral research associate at the Department of Architecture. Over the past 10 years, Luisa held several positions in different universities in Italy, but also abroad. So Luisa is the founding member and president of City Space Architecture, a no-profit organization which is partner of UN Habitat Global Public Space Program, based, of course, the office and the City Space Architecture is based again in Bologna, and aim to promote this public space culture. Luisa is also a founding editor and journal manager of Journal of Public Space, the first international interdisciplinary academic open access journal dedicated to public space. So, Luisa, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Francesco, for the invitation to join this session. I'm glad to be here to discuss about how to make places, which I think is one of the hot topics these days. Since I'm into very much public space, and of course developing concepts and methodology and implementation of places is also part of my work and research. I'm also currently part of a European program called A Place, which is working on defining identity of places through creative and artistic practices. So we are working at the European level, but we are also expanding our activities by engaging artists beyond Europe in different cities in Europe. So in case you're interested, you can just follow aplace.eu. We are in the second year of activities, and we develop work on different means. I'm working on audiovisual contents mainly, but we also have site-specific art interventions in places, and we engage also curators, scholars, professionals, not just artists, to discuss about the importance of meaning of places. So I'm glad to be here because I see we have a great session today with many very interesting scholars. It's nice also to find some friends in this session. So let's start with the first speaker, Kate Meyrick, that will present a lecture titled People and Purpose Planning for Performance at Precinct Scale. I'm just reading a few words from Kate's bio. Kate is a passionate urbanist and placemaker with more than 25 years of international experience working throughout Australia, as well as Asia, Europe, and the United States. She's globally respected for her expertise in visioning and positioning the city-scale precincts, working sensitively with stakeholders and the community to co-create powerful new futures for well-loved places. Kate, the floor is yours.
Grazie mille, Luisa.
Prego.
Okay, the worst part of any presentation is trying to make your PowerPoint actually come up on the screen. So just give me 1 second to make sure that you are actually able to see what I'm showing and that you can see it in full screen or not. There we go. So thank you very much, everybody, for letting me have a bit of time this afternoon to share some thoughts with you. I really appreciate that. My name is Kate Meyrick, and as Louisa said, I'm a director from an Australian company called Urbis, and we have a sister office called Cistri, which is based out in Singapore. So I have a long bio because I'm quite old, and I've had a lot of opportunity to work on large precinct scale projects around the world, starting in my own home city of London, and then moving across the US, Asia, and into Australia most recently. And obviously for the last 15 months, my career traveling around the world has been somewhat cut short. But I thought I might share a few thoughts with you today, just from the top down, thinking about how, as a developer and a city authority, we need to think more carefully about the productive potential and the power of places for people at a precinct scale. But before we do that, it's inevitable that any presentation thinks a little bit about COVID-19. And I just want to take a different perspective on this, which is that many of the changes we have seen as a result of disruptions from COVID-19 have definitely impacted our cities very greatly. And as an urbanist, I've been asked many times, do you think that cities will even matter in the future? And I would argue that for nations hoping to transition their economies to one based on knowledge and ideas, cities are going to matter even more than ever. But the reality check is that not all cities are going to recover at the same rate. And in the future, not all cities are going to succeed equally. But one thing that's very important for us to understand is that all of the changes we have seen amplified and accelerated by COVID-19 were already happening in our cities back in 2019. And so all we're really seeing is a rate of change that has become a lot faster. So that imperative around changing economic structure, the increasing importance of talent, the changing ways in which we work and want to spend our working life, and the places or the precincts in which we work most effectively, they were all happening just slowly. This focus on understanding the health of our planet, as well as our human health and the resilience at a personal and a planetary scale, were also very important back in 2019. They've just been pulled into sharper relief. The renaissance of our neighborhoods as places that had strong social capital, where we were able to actually live a high amenity life and engage in activities that were meaningful to us, have become increasingly important because for many of us, the neighborhood is the only place that we've been able to visit for many months over the last year. And potentially the greatest impact of all, that the city centre environment, usually the most significant part of our city, the one that's best known to everybody from overseas and the place that we see as an asset for everybody, has become a very quiet and deserted location as we've moved our shopping habits, our social habits, and our work habits online. And one of the other things that COVID-19 has forced us to think about is trust, the trust that exists between ourselves as individuals, the trust that exists between us and our governments, and the trust that exists between our governments and other institutions, as we've all been asked to behave in ways that we may not really want to. And you can see across different countries the extent to which that's been successful or not. So if I look at Australia, for example, a country of quite rebellious people who ordinarily aren't very good at doing what they've been told, we've had great trust with our national government, with our state governments, with our local authorities, and we've been able to manage the impacts of this pandemic reasonably successfully. Whereas my original country, London, not usually thought of as being a bunch of disobedient people, haven't wanted to toe the line, haven't been prepared to sit at home and wait to be given further instructions, and we've seen a much longer tail to the pandemic that might have been necessary. So I think it's really important before we start to think about precincts and their power to propel a city, that we understand that in the last year and a half, we've had a lot of time to think about what kind of city environment and experience do we really want to come back to, and how do we start to plan for that in a more deliberate or intentional way. So what even is a precinct? In some countries, we don't even call it a precinct, we might call it a district. It's effectively just an area of the city that has a real or a perceived barrier or boundary that we can all agree on, and that has a clear purpose. So when we go there, we know what to expect. We know what this precinct is about. And they come in all sorts of shapes. So you can be a cultural district, an innovation district, a health precinct, a city business district. You can be a mixed-use precinct or a mixed-use district, but they all really have one thing in common, that they have clarity around their purpose and they've been thought of in a holistic way. And this is why they're such an important tool for us to think about when we imagine how we can facilitate social, economic and environmental change that will benefit our communities into the future. So at the scale of a precinct, we have sufficient size to be able to think about sharing resources or services. We can think about the balance between supply and demand, things like energy, for example, or other resources. There's an economy of scale that's favorable to us when we think about investment or when we think about economic activation, if it was innovation, for example, or higher order advanced professional services. We have positive externalities that come because we exist at a precinct scale. Within a precinct, we can actually influence people to behave differently, so it can help us to drive behavioural change that can then flow out more broadly into a city. We're able to actually think about the circular economy. We can extract value from waste products. At the other end of the scale, we can create that social experience that makes us feel like we're part of a village where people know us, we know them, we're able to make a contribution, and we feel part of something that's bigger than ourselves. And similarly, they also have an impact when they are designed successfully, planned with forethought and managed actively to have a really positive impact on urban greening and the environmental quality of the cities in which we live. But one of the things that's become increasingly important for us to understand if we're going to invest in the delivery of new precincts in our cities, particularly those that are driven by the regeneration or the redevelopment and renewal of key parts of our inner city areas, is how powerful precinct thinking mentality can be to driving new economic activity. So precincts often have an intrinsic set of advantages because they often have a transport connection, they've been planned holistically, often around a really powerful public realm experience that invites people to come and to stay. And so this combination of accessibility, amenity, and agglomeration, or the close proximity of economic actors all in the same place, create huge value for a city. And for some cities, this translates into a national advantage. So we find ourselves in a place where ideas and knowledge are able to be shared really quickly. So people still pass knowledge and ideas best face to face. That events like this are fantastic for us as professionals to share our professional knowledge. But if we're working in a biomed industry, if we're working in a high-tech industry, we actually need to be able to touch and sit with and work with our colleagues in a much more tactile way. We understand that different kinds of economic sectors have different propensities to benefit from being in a precinct, and particularly those that provide greater value for a city or a national economy. They benefit really greatly in a contemporary city from being able to put actors within 400 to 600 metres of each other. We also know that when we think about how we plan for a precinct, if we're able to aggregate a land holding within a single special purpose vehicle, and we're able to put a very clear vision across the top of that, and we're able to think about the performance measures that are intrinsically connected to the vision of our city, we actually have something incredibly powerful as a building block for success for the next generation of our city's journey. So I'd just like to actually touch on a couple of examples, and I sort of feel a little bit smug that one of my examples comes from Italy. So sorry, it's not from Bologna, Louisa. I do occasionally talk about La Bolognina, actually as a district around the station, but this is my favorite example in the entire world of a precinct that has been very thoughtfully created and is having a very powerful impact at a social and an economic level. So Porta Nuova is a fairly sizable 36-hectare district that exists just a little bit to the side of the central station in Milan. If you fly over the city of Milan, you can't help but see it because they are the only tall buildings in the city centre. Nothing around it feels at all like this. So it's a very concentrated space, but it's been very cleverly and thoughtfully designed to unite three neighbourhoods that used to be divided by a railway line, a freight line and a road. And we've been able to put a large area of public space through the middle, like the unifying effect of this precinct. And around it, we've created three different precincts, one of which has a really strong commercial focus. It's where the city of Milan has its municipal headquarters. It has a strong financial overlay to it, and it's represented in this picture by the silvery coloured buildings. We've created a really vibrant residential precinct where the Bosco Verticale are. So those are the buildings that you might be able to see sort of in the middle of the picture there, covered in trees. Again, with a ground plane that is very much dedicated to people and has a number of cultural uses, including a museum that sit around it. And then at the far end, we've got a series of residential and commercial buildings that form a bit of a mixed-use precinct. But the most exciting part of it is that the central axis of this is all public open space, a beautiful environment that people from the 3 neighbourhoods around it are able to come to enjoy time together, who previously would not have been able to physically meet because the roads and the rail lines just separated the area too greatly. And bringing this coalition of uses of culture, of commerce, and of community together has created a very powerful place that Milanese people, as well as visitors, enjoy being, and has become a new calling card for a city that had a very strong fashion and design focus, and now is able to reinterpret that in a very contemporary way. As a second example, I'd like to call attention to a project in my own city, and I laugh a little bit because I actually worked on the bid team that didn't win King's Cross RAILYARDS. So very much of my heart is programmed to think that this is a terrible answer and we could have done so much better. But the reality is we really couldn't have done better than this. It's an excellent example of a different kind of precinct, a precinct which is not vertical, but is nonetheless very high density, a precinct that's been able to adaptively use 47 heritage buildings, and again has invested in bringing forward the value of the public spaces as the unifier for the precinct, where we've got more than 27 high-tech uses congregated around the precinct, including Facebook and Google and YouTube. The Guardian newspaper's digital headquarters is here. We also have Biomed Innovation and a number of other artistic installations where we've got fabrication plants for very well-known global artists like Andy Goldsworthy, on top of our ordinary affordable housing, high-end housing, retail uses, and right here in the foreground, St Martin, the old St Martin's Art School, which is now the University of the Arts in the Granary building, the centrepiece and the first element of King's Cross RAILYARDS that was brought to life. And if I stand back from these two and I ask myself, what is it that they actually have in common? It would be 3 things: that they were led by a really strong, bold vision that understood the importance of creating a connection between the vision for the precinct and the future of the city, that this precinct powers the direction that the city was trying to travel. In London's case, creating high-tech precincts. In Milan's case, the reinterpretation of the future of design and the contemporization of culture. The second thing is that they were created with love from the top down, using enabling policy, this strong vision mechanism, enlightened capital investment mechanisms, but at the same time, they were also curated from the ground up. So huge levels of community involvement in the planning, the design, and the programming of these places so that they succeed for local people as much as they succeed for business or succeed for visitors. And when I think about that, a little bit of a diagram here is if we're thinking about how we drive great productive places, great productive precincts in our own communities, in our own cities, first and foremost, we have to think of this as a great place. So we have to understand that from the top down, there are always going to be megatrends and their influences and impacts. Things like COVID as an external shock are always going to come along, and we do need to understand how they are going to shape our future and force us to be more agile in our response to their disruption. In the middle here, we also have to understand that in future, it's not going to be the tenants that we're designing for, it's the talent that works for our tenants. If we can't create these precincts as great places, talent won't work here and people won't want to live here. And in that case, they become a sterile campus environment that no longer lends itself to the future of a knowledge and creative economy. And then in the ground level there, it's how do we understand what the mixed use component of this precinct needs to be? Because even the most pure precinct, a health precinct, for example, still exists to ensure that the people there are able to live productive and meaningful lives, that they're enabled to do their best work. So what are the elements of place? What is the curation of program? How do we involve art? How do we understand the implication of a footprint for culture? How do we make sure that the people who are here are living lives where they're fit and healthy and able to balance their work with the remainder of their life and the things that they choose to do in their free time? So as I come to the last of my slides, I just leave you with 5 thoughts that investing in precincts, thinking about how we plan for precincts, how we embed them in our planning processes, how we create value for our cities and our citizens out of from them, actually requires us to embed thinking about precinct design and precinct program without the prescription of control. So we have to understand that a precinct is a different kind of asset that can take 10, 15, 20, and sometimes 25 years to complete. And the picture here is actually my 3rd example of a great precinct. It's Barangaroo in Sydney. And if we think about Barangaroo, from the headland to Barangaroo South, its commercial precinct, to complete this will take us 20 years. So starting in 2010, 2011, we're unlikely to be completed much before the end of the 2020s. So we have to think about time and the impact of time on the evolution of our precinct. We need to think about purpose. What is the purpose of this precinct, and how do we want it to perform for our city and for our citizens? Against what performance measures are we likely to tell ourselves if we've been successful? We need to make sure we've allocated sufficient upfront investment in place creation and public realm, because this is our value proposition and competitive advantage. And finally, we need to understand how we facilitate partnerships across government and with key private sector partners and the community to make sure that the precincts that we create are open precincts that create value for everybody. And with that, I'll say thank you very much and look forward to listening to everybody else whilst I enjoy my cup of tea.
Thank you, Kate. I think you gave an excellent overview on this approach to place by discussing precincts or districts, as you want to call them. And I like case studies you presented. Milan is an excellent example. They are innovating a lot and leading the way in Italy. And also the provocations at the end. I think this will be helpful for the discussion we will have at the end of the panel, combining talent, investment, time, and capacity also to develop successful and efficient programs able to develop real sense of places in planning activities, but also in everyday life, which is what we think we are all looking for. Okay, so we move to the